Hi, I'm Adam Summer. You're listening to the Yerushalmi Talk podcast with the support of the Yeshivat Devar Yerushalayim in Har Nof, Jerusalem. This is Demai, chapter 3, Halacha 6. Very short Mishnah, very short Gemara, and it's going to finish up chapter 3. The Mishnah talks about someone who gives food over to his mother-in-law. The Rambam in the commentary in the Mishnah says that this is going to be in order that she cooks it. And the Mishnah is going to be dealing with a case where the son-in-law is the haver and the mother-in-law is an ama aretz. So the Mishnah says one who gives food to his mother-in-law must tithe that which he gives her and that which he takes back from her, for she is suspected of exchanging that which spoils. Now, what does that mean, that which spoils? So if something spoils, this mother-in-law is going to care about the haver son-in-law. And she doesn't want him, she's, cleaning some heads of lettuce. She sees things that are spoiling. And she knows she got back a certain amount of lettuce. And she'll say, I have some good lettuce over here. And I'm going to add some of my lettuce over here to my son-in-law's lettuce. So it evens out and he doesn't lose anything. Except now you have a mixture. So the reason here is that although the ama aretz is generally not going to be suspected of exchanging food that's entrusted to them, the mother-in-law is going to be the exception. The mother-in-law is going to be suspected of exchanging the son-in-law's food because she's trying to help him out. She's trying to help out the daughter, the son-in-law. And why are you tithing it to, why are you tithing it if you're the haver giving to the mother-in-law? Because she's going to eat from it. She's going to taste from it. She's going to, I just made all this. I'm going to take some for myself and I'm going to eat some of it. And if you're not tithing it, she's going to have the consequence of eating untithed food or not properly tithed food. So that's also a big chiddush here. Now, if we didn't know this in the Mishnah and we were just looking at chapter 3 halacha 4, which is that you give food to the ama aretz and they're entrusted to watch the food and you can just assume that they're not going to switch it, then you can trust them. But over here there is a suspicion that there might be switching. And by the way, it's not out of theft, it's not out of harm. The mother-in-law is trying to help out the son-in-law. There's nothing malicious here. So, very beautiful reasoning and logic here. And this Mishnah is necessary because you just wouldn't know this otherwise. And you wouldn't be able to come up with the right halacha if we didn't have the Mishnah. You'd be looking at chapter 3, halacha 4, and you'd come up with the opposite conclusion. So, Rabbi Yehuda says that she desires the well-being of her daughter, and she is embarrassed on the account of her son-in-law. So Rabbi Yehuda is going to give two reasons why the mother-in-law would exchange the son-in-law's spoiled food with her own unspoiled food. One is she wants to make sure her daughter doesn't eat spoiled food. And two, she's embarrassed to return spoiled food back to the son-in-law. And the Gemara is going to end up explaining that Rabbi Yehuda is the author of the Mishnah's ruling, but the rabbis actually disagree with him. And they're going to be holding that a mother-in-law is willing to return spoiled food to her son-in-law, and since there's no worry that she will exchange his food with hers, her son-in-law does not need to tithe the food that he gave her. So, very interesting that Rabbi Yehuda is the one who authored the Mishnah's ruling, and very interesting that the rabbis disagreed with her. So the Mishnah is going to continue. It's going to say, but Rabbi Yehuda agrees in the case of one who gives his mother-in-law food to prepare during Shvius, she is not suspected of exchanging it and thus feeding her daughter Shvius produce. So the Maraful is going to be saying that one who during Shvius gives his mother-in-law non-Shvius produce to prepare, and she's not worried that the food's going to get ruined, And really what this is trying to say, says the Mara Fulda, that although Rabbi Yehuda maintains that a mother-in-law might replace the son-in-law's spoiled food with Demai, he agrees that she would not do so with Shvius produce. And the Amma Aretz is going to consider transgressing the laws of Shvius more serious than transgressing the laws of tithes. And a mother would not cause her daughter to unknowingly eat Shvius produce in an unauthorized way, even at the risk of serving her son-in-law and daughter-in-law or daughter spoiled food. So the Haver does not need to be worried that the mother-in-law is returning to him Shvius produce. That's going to be the idea. Now, the Gemara is going to refine this and explain it. And the Mishnah shows an anonymous statement. And the Gemara is going to actually identify the author of the anonymous statement. And the Gemara is going to go like this. Rabbi Yochanan said, also the Mishnah's first statement, in other words, the ruling that one who gives his mother-in-law must tithe that which he gives her and that which he takes back from her, was said according to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Very big Kiddush here. So, although the opening statement of the Mishnah is explained by Rabbi Yehuda, one might have thought that the author is someone other than Rabbi Yehuda. And Rabbi Yochanan is basically teaching that that's not the case. The author of the statement is none other than Rabbi Yehuda. The Mishnah should be understood as though it is stated as follows. Okay, this is what Rabbi Kanievsky says. He's saying in his Beur shiurim that it should be understood like this: that one who gives food to his mother-in-law must tithe that which he gives her and that which he takes back from her. These are the words of Rabbi Yehuda. For Rabbi Yehuda says that's, and then the rest of the Mishnah, that she desires the well-being of the daughter and embarrassed on account of the son-in-law. So that's a big Hiddush that the anonymous Mishnah is also going to be done by Rabbi Yehuda. Now, the Gemara is going to continue, and it's going to say that Rabbi Yehuda says that one who gives food to his mother-in-law is as one who gives food to an innkeeper. So what's going on over here? And I don't think there's anything necessarily untoward going on here, but there is a suspect of exchange. So just as the innkeeper would be suspected of exchanging the food that she gives, that she gets from the lodger, so too the mother-in-law is going to be suspected of exchanging food that she receives from the son-in-law. The Gemara says, but the rabbis say that one who gives food to his mother-in-law is as one who gives food to his neighbor. And just as a neighbor is not going to be suspected of exchanging the food that he receives from the fellow neighbor, so too the mother-in-law is basically going to be like a neighbor and is not going to be suspected of exchanging the food she gives to the son-in-law. So the rabbis disagree with Rabbi Yehuda's statement, and Rabbi Kanievsky is going to explain this like this. Rabbi Kanievsky says that the rabbis disagree with Rabbi Yehuda's comparison between the innkeeper and the mother-in-law, and although the innkeeper is going to make the exchange to benefit the lodger, that would be the case of Rashi, her ultimate reason for doing so is to benefit herself. She wishes to supply the lodger with superior quality food in order to retain him as a customer. Again, 5-star hotels want people to come back and pay for the 5-star experience. So you could imagine a 5-star hotel doing something like that. You want the business to come back. Now, Rabbi Kanievsky continues and says, according to the rabbis, a mother-in-law has no such motive to exchange her son-in-law's food and will not do it. And therefore, the rabbis compare a mother-in-law to a neighbor. And neither a mother-in-law nor a neighbor is going to have enough reason to make an exchange. And just as a neighbor will not do it, so too the mother-in-law will not do it. So the Gemara is going to basically finish up. This is a very, very short set of Gemaras. And it's basically going to say like this. It's going to say, and this is talking about a neighbor, okay, that a neighbor is not going to be suspected of making an exchange. Gemara says it was taught in Baraisa, one who gives his neighbor dough to be baked into bread for him, or food to be made into cooked dish for him, does not need to be worried on account of shvius, nor on account of maestros. That is, that basically doesn't need to worry that she exchanged her shvius or untithed produce with his. And the Gemara says, when is this so? When he also gave her yeast and spices with which to leaven the dough or to season the dish. The Gemara is going to refine this and going to say, but if he did not give her yeast and spices, he must be concerned about shvius and maestros. And the idea about this is that during the shvius year, he has to be worried that she leavened the bread or spiced the dish with yeast or spices of shvius produce. And this, again, is during the shvius year. Now, during the non-shvius year, he has to be worried that the yeast and the spices are untied, and he has to tithe what he's getting back, just like somebody's tithing Demai. So the Mara Fulda is going to explain this and say that the Brisa is saying that one must be concerned that the spices have not been tithed, and that implies that spices, by the way, are subject to tithes. And the Brisa is basically saying that a haver who gave dough but not spices and yeast in the Am Haaretz has to be worried about shvius and maestros. Okay? Now, the Gemara is going to try to get more information on this and then finish up. Very, very short. It says, what kind of mother-in-law is discussed in this Mishnah? And, is his mother-in-law, from Erisin or from Nisuin? In other words, when does this even take effect? Right? Jewish law, marriage takes place in two stages. You have Erisin and Nisuin. And in the Erisin, that's done, by the way, Kiddush 1-1, right? Right in the beginning of Kiddushin. You give the bride an object of value like a ring, and there's witnesses there. And, she becomes a legal wife. And she can't live with someone else. And the bride stays in the father's house until he can go get a house, or until a later date. And it's kind of like an engagement. The second stage with Nisuin is performed where the bride is going to be brought into the husband's home, and then they live together as husband and wife, and then she is fully married. Today, by the way, the custom is done only a few minutes apart, and but this is how it was done 2,000 years ago. Anyway, in this Mishnah, Rabbi Yudah is giving two reasons why a mother-in-law would be suspected of exchanging the food. Okay, so one would be that she wished to prevent her daughter from eating spoiled food, and two is because she's embarrassed to return spoiled food to the son-in-law. Now, while the second reason would apply to both a mother-in-law from Erisin or Nisuin, the first reason is going to apply only to the mother-in-law from Nisuin. And that's going to be where the woman is going to live together with the husband as husband and wife. And that's going to be affected by the exchange of the husband's food. Now, when you have the woman living with her parents, then they're not affected by this kind of exchange. The Gemara is really asking that would the mother-in-law be suspected of exchanging the son-in-law's food? In a case only where the mother-in-law from Nisuin is also going to be suspected, or would it be from Erisin? And would this be a case where from Erisin she would be suspected? And the Gemara is going to refine this. And basically the question's asking and saying, is there any difference in this case between a mother-in-law from, Erisin or mother-in-law from Nisuin? And the answer is no, there's not a difference. And, Gemara finishes up and says, here too, there's no difference between a mother-in-law from Erisin and mother-in-law from Nisuin. In other words, in this case, according to Gemara Fulda, mother-in-law is not suspected of exchanging son-in-law's shvius food, and that would apply equally to a son-in-law from Erisin or from Nisuin. And, the mother-in-law is suspected of exchanging the son-in-law's untithed food, but that also is going to apply equally from either point of marriage, either the Nisuin, the Nisuin, or when he acquires her before they live together in the Erusuin. So really, there's a I want to look at this with the Rambam for a second. The Rambam is going to explain that the Gemara asked is really, according to the opinion of the sages, on who, although not mentioned in the Mishnah, holds that a mother-in-law is not suspected of exchanging the son-in-law's food. And that's a big question. Now, according to Derech Hamuna, that's the Vilna Goan. Derech Hamuna is not the Vilna Goan. That's Rabbi Kanievsky. The Gemara is going to ask like this. He's basically saying, the mother-in-law, from Erusin has less of a reason to exchange the son-in-law's food than a mother-in-law from Nisuin. And perhaps this would be, according to the sages, only a mother-in-law from a Nisuin is not suspected of exchanging the son-in-law's untithed food, but a mother-in-law from Nisuin is. Now, the Gemara is disproving, says Derech Hamuna, this position from the later segment of the Mishnah, and Rabbi Yehuda agreeing with the sages that a mother-in-law is not suspected of exchanging his food with the shvius produce. And basically, in this case, Rabbi Yehuda is agreeing with the sages regarding shvius produce, and that would refer to the mother-in-law from Nisuin. And in this case, they're disagreeing on untithed food. And this would be a mother-in-law in Nisuin. So the sages are holding that a mother-in-law from Nisuin is not suspected of exchanging a son-in-law's untithed produce. But Rabbi Yehuda but Rabbi Yehuda does hold that there's a difference between the Erusin and the Nisuin. And the sages, by the way, are holding that there's no difference for the mother-in-law, either in the shvius year or a regular year, either for, Erusin or Nisuin. Have a great day, and that will finish up Chapter 3, Halacha 4.